Imagine a world millions of years in the future. A world where evolution has written a new chapter in the story of life. The world is inhabited by very strange creatures, like nothing the Earth has ever seen. 200 million years in the future, a parched, barren desert stretches over 8,000 kilometers. Only a few creatures survive in this harsh, brutal landscape. And to do so requires some very unusual lifestyles. Here, nothing is what it seems. This baking desert is fueled by food that comes from the other side of a massive range of mountains running down its eastern edge. In 200 million years' time, the planet itself is very different. All the continents have collided and formed one massive supercontinent. The desert is formed where the mountains on the east coast shield the land from the moisture of the global ocean. On this side of the mountains, strange flying creatures, flish, descended from fish, live on the coast and feed over the open water. But they have to live with a continuous danger of violent storms.
Now, one of the things about a supercontinent is, with all the land masses clumped together, surrounded in essence by one huge ocean, the energy balance of the globe changes. There's a lot more energy, a lot warmer ocean, a lot more energy is transferred to the atmosphere. We have much more powerful storms.
Huge hurricanes batter the coastline of the supercontinent. They are hypercanes, 50% stronger than today's most powerful hurricanes, with 400-kilometer-an-hour winds. It would be impossible for any creature to fight against this wind. Swept up by the howling winds, the flish are carried deep into the mountains.
Every once in a while, one of these giant storms that's strong enough to make it over the mountains and make it into this desert inside the continent will bring with it flish. Enormous numbers of flish that got caught up in the storm, blown inland, and as the storm dies out, the flish settle down, as it were, as aerial fertilizer, entering the ecosystem as carcasses.
The flish lie dying in the scorching sun, but already there's something looking for them. A bumble beetle. It can fly at 35 kilometers an hour, fast for an insect, and it has to. It must search vast areas to find one of these flish graveyards.
The bumble beetle's got two problems. The overriding one is that its food source is very spread out and it doesn't know where it is. Because it's spread out, it's got to be able to travel fast and cheaply. And because it's got to find the food, it needs an effective sensory mechanism. Now, modern insects often find food by scent with antennae. But the problem with antennae is they're big and they create a lot of drag. So it makes flight expensive, or it forces the insect to go slowly. The bumble beetle can't do that. It's therefore become rather modified. It's still a bit like an insect in shape, but it's very streamlined.
The front legs are covered in hairs, turning them into extra antennae. But these hairs and the antennae fold down in flight to reduce drag. Stiff wing cases also provide extra lift, saving energy in flight. It starts its journey with 40% of its body filled with fat, which gives it just enough fuel to fly for 24 hours non-stop. The bumble beetle can pick up the scent of a dead flish from 10 kilometers away. And after searching for several hours, it's found one. But this flish is already occupied. By a grimworm, a bizarre kind of insect. Inside the body of the dead flish, grimworms grow quickly on the rich meat. They double their size in 48 hours. As grimworms spend their whole lives eating, their mouthparts have been modified into 3 sets of slicing and grinding jaws. A bumble beetle can't compete with this eating machine. It has no choice but to continue its search. Time is running out.
This desert is one of the harshest environments we can imagine for terrestrial plants and animals to survive in. But they're there. How do they do it? Well, we don't really have to use science fiction again. We can simply turn around and see how plants and animals survive in similar environments. The Namib Desert of southwestern Africa, for example, the Atacama Desert of Chile in the present day. These too have life.
Today, desert animals have different ways of staying cool. The sidewinder keeps most of its body off the burning sand. Other animals, like meerkats, stay in the shade during the day, keeping out of the fierce sun. And a ground squirrel lowers its body temperature by flattening its body onto the cool earth at the bottom of its burrow. But the most common and effective way of staying cool is to wait for nightfall. Now, a whole variety of creatures emerge from their burrows into the cool night air. The desert comes alive. Lizards, like geckos, are joined on the surface by birds, like burrowing owls. Under a clear sky, the desert quickly radiates away the day's heat. 200 million years in the future, there are no mammals, no reptiles, no birds. But there's still life in the desert. These creatures spent the heat of the day buried deep in the cool soil. Desert hoppers. They're about 30 centimeters high and weigh 2 kilograms. But despite their size, they still look similar to their ancestor, the snail. It seems like a big change for a common snail to live in a desert and hop.
Snails have a large foot. The bulk of the body mass is a strong foot, which they crawl on. Living snails secrete a mucus out of the bottom of the foot. Small muscular waves in the foot propel themselves through the mucus then. That's the way the vast majority of snails locomote. A few have invented another way, and this way makes it not implausible that a snail will be jumping around the desert. The conchas are marine snails that already have evolved a foot that's modified into a jumping organ, so they'll push the foot and actually lift off the floor into the water, escaping predators, for example. And it's completely believable that an animal could take this on land into the desert.
So in some ways, today's snails are already pre-adapted for this strange way of moving. Hopping has a lot of advantages in a desert. It keeps their bodies off the hot sand, and they don't need a slime trail, which wastes water. And hopping is a much more efficient way to cover long distances in search of the sparse desert plants they eat. As the cool of the night creeps over the future desert, it's not just the desert hoppers that take advantage of the darkness. The grimworms have eaten all they can of the carcass, and to find more food, they have to change. Burying themselves in the ground to metamorphose into the next stage of their life cycle. The desert hoppers are still out foraging, eating what they can of the desert plants throughout the night. But some plants here are deadly. This is the trap of a huge carnivorous plant, the deathbottle. Next morning, as the sun rises, the rest of the desert hoppers retreat to the shade before they're caught out in the heat. But for the trapped hopper, there's no escape, impaled on the poisonous spines of this deathbottle plant. As the hopper dies, the plant will start to digest its victim. The plant regrows the lid of the trap. Once it's covered by sand, the trap is set once more. There are carnivorous plants around today. Living on poor soil, they feed on insects to gain essential nutrients. The sundew is covered by hairs with sticky ends. When the trapped insect struggles, the plant seals the trap.
This new bottle trap out in the desert is a desert predator. It is different because it is predating upon a much larger size prey. Most carnivorous plants today are dealing with insects. They're not out after things that could be measured in many ounces. Because it is working on bigger prey, it has something that has the potential, once that prey has fallen into the trap, to do damage to the trap. So when you need to immobilize that prey item very quickly. So in this case, instead of simply killing it off by immersing it in the digestive juices, the deathbottle trap actually has poisoned spines that will kill the organism before it can thrash around.
So by trapping and digesting animals, the death bottles have solved the problem of obtaining nutrients from the sterile desert soil. But like all plants, they still have to reproduce and spread their seeds across the vast desert. The deathbottle plants produce flowers that look and smell just like a dead flish. Just what the exhausted bumble beetle has been trying to find. Its sensitive antennae pick up the fake scent and it homes in on the flower. But it only has a few hours of fat reserves left. It even finds what looks like a wound, a way into the carcass. But this time, it's not a deadly trap. It's a clever way for the plant to use the bumble beetle.
A major problem facing any plant is going to be reproduction. And in the case of the death flask in the desert, where plants are widely spread from each other, one could envision wind dispersal, but it seems much more likely and effective to have animal dispersal, which is where the bumble beetle comes in. How are you going to attract a carnivorous beetle to a plant? Well, the answer is the usual, and this has been invented repeatedly in living plants, that you fake it out by smelling bad. Down comes the bumble beetle, tracked in by both the smell, which gives it a sense of here comes another free meal, and the appearance. It goes into what it thinks is a wound within this, what it perceives to be a flish, and it ends up falling into what amounts to another kind of flask-like trap, except this one is lined by the seeds. The seeds are sticky, and the bumble beetle sort of bumps around trying to get its way out, and the seeds get stuck all over it. And at some point in its attempts to escape the trap, it lights upon a particular portion of the inside of the trap that is more lightly colored, which happens to be a completely surprise-laden spring. And when it hits that particular point within the flower literally catapults the bumble beetle out.
But insects can be made to do more than carry pollen.
The second aspect in which makes the bumble beetle such a great pollinator is that not only does it require fewer seeds that the bumble beetle can then move, but the bumble beetle has behavior. It is not going to randomly go fly off and sit on a rock to get rid of these particular seeds. It is going to go out and it's going to seek its own sustenance. And what's its own sustenance? A nice rotting flish.
The bumble beetle is now laden with seeds and finally picks up the scent of a real dead flish. But there's one last problem to solve. Dead flish attract beetles from all over the desert, and this one has to use its last reserves of strength to fight for the carcass. As they fight above the dead flish, the seeds are dislodged and sown around the carcass, the only fertilizer in the barren soil. Thanks to the bumble beetle, the deathbottle plant has spread its seeds to a new part of the desert. The beetle has been flying for nearly a day. This is its last chance. Most bumble beetles never find a flish in time. They simply run out of fuel and die. But even though it's found a flish, the beetle won't eat it. All this time, it's been searching for a flish to deliver its very strange cargo. A cargo of grimworms. The grimworms are the maggots of the bumble beetle. They live their entire life inside the dead flish, eating and growing. But to find more flish, the grimworms dig into the ground, pupate, and change into the adult bumble beetle. The adult bumble beetles scour the desert desperately searching for new flish carcasses. But instead of carrying eggs like normal insects today, the eggs hatch out inside the bumble beetle. Small maggot grimworms grow inside their mother, so that when the bumble beetle finds a flish, they can emerge and start eating straight away before the flish dries out in the desert heat. The bumble beetle's job is done, and her young crawl out from her broken body. Her journey is over, and she dies. A new generation begins, and life in the desert goes on. Somewhere, the other side of the mountains, another storm is brewing. And more flish are swept over the mountains into the desert. "200 million years in the future, the death of one creature supports a strange and bizarre collection of plants and animals that inhabit this graveyard desert."